Felix had always been more comfortable with code than with people. For 7 years, he worked alone in a modest apartment on the eastern edge of the city, his only companions the soft hum of servers and the pale glow of multiple monitors. He was the principal architect of Sentinel, a predictive surveillance system commissioned by the Metropolitan Police. Sentinel ingested vast streams of data, traffic cameras, financial transactions, social media, phone metadata, and used machine learning to forecast where and when crime would occur. The system had been hailed as a revolution, cutting street-level crime by nearly 30% in 2 years. Felix took no pride in the accolades. To him, Sentinel was a mathematical problem he had solved. But one evening, while running routine diagnostics, he noticed an anomaly. A middle-aged librarian named Clara Dietz had been flagged as a high-probability threat for armed robbery. The score was 94%, yet her profile showed no prior record, no sudden behavioral shifts, no financial distress. Felix frowned. He had designed Sentinel to avoid such statistical impossibilities. He decided to dig deeper, unaware that his curiosity would soon unravel a conspiracy buried inside his own creation. The quiet hum of his servers suddenly felt ominous, as if the machine itself was waiting to see what he would do next. He spent the rest of the night scrolling through logs, his fingers moving with the precision of someone who understood that every line of code carried consequences. Over the next 48 hours, Felix traced the anomaly through layers of Sentinel's decision-making architecture. He wrote custom scripts to decompile the flagged risk assessments, comparing them against raw input data. What he found made his stomach clench. Clara Dietz's high threat score had not been generated by the original algorithms, it had been injected via a secondary module, a piece of code he had never written. Someone had inserted a hidden subroutine that altered risk profiles after the main processing was complete. The subroutine was elegant, almost invisible, designed to override Sentinel's outputs with fabricated probabilities. Felix checked other flagged cases and found dozens more. In each instance, the system had been manipulated to mark innocent citizens as imminent threats. Subsequent police operations resulted in arrests, contraband discovered during searches, and charges that led to convictions. The arrests boosted clearance rates, earned commendations for the precinct, and secured budget increases. Felix sat motionless for a long time, staring at the screen. His creation had not merely been abused, it had been weaponized to frame innocent people. He felt a cold rage building beneath his usual calm, and with it, the weight of a choice that would shatter his solitude. He knew that exposing the truth would mean turning against the very institution that had funded his work, and that such a decision could not be undone. Felix spent the next week mapping the extent of the manipulation. He worked in fragmented hours, sleeping little, his apartment filling with empty coffee cups. He discovered that the rogue subroutine connected to a specific user account, a senior system administrator named Victor Rask. Rask was not a programmer by training but had been assigned to Sentinel's maintenance unit after a political appointment. Felix cross-referenced the manipulated cases and found a pattern. Each framed individual had been linked to investigations led by a single judge, Elena Voss, a magistrate known for her relentless scrutiny of police corruption. The staged arrests served a dual purpose: they padded statistics while discrediting or neutralizing people who had crossed paths with Voss's inquiries. Felix realized that Judge Voss herself was now in Sentinel's crosshairs. A newly inserted file flagged her as a systemic threat, with fabricated evidence suggesting she was taking bribes. If the subroutine executed as designed, Voss would be arrested within weeks, her career destroyed, and any investigation into police corruption would die with her. Felix knew he could no longer remain a spectator. But he was a recluse, a builder of systems, not a crusader. To act was to risk everything, including his freedom, because the people behind the scheme would not hesitate to destroy anyone who threatened their operation. He stared at the code that had become his undoing. Felix considered his options with the same methodical rigor he applied to code. He could go to the police internal affairs division, but the corruption reached into the highest ranks of the department. He could leak the data to journalists, but he had no contacts and no guarantee the evidence would not be buried. He could do nothing and return to his quiet life, telling himself it was not his responsibility. The thought lasted only a moment. He had built Sentinel, its misuse was a poison he had unknowingly spread. He decided to warn Judge Voss directly, but anonymously. Using encrypted channels and a series of virtual machines, he created a disposable email account and composed a message detailing the manipulation, including specific case numbers and technical evidence. He sent it with a self-destructing link to the raw data. Then he waited. For 2 days, there was no response. He began to fear the email had been ignored or intercepted. On the 3rd day, he monitored Sentinel's logs and saw that someone had accessed the evidence files from an IP address traced to the courthouse. Judge Voss had opened the link. But she had not yet taken any public action, and the subroutine targeting her remained active. Felix knew he had to do more, even if it meant exposing himself to the same surveillance apparatus he had built. He began planning his next move with the precision of a chess player. Felix decided to escalate by becoming the silent partner to Voss's investigation. He built a secure channel, a small server that would allow him to feed her information without revealing his identity. He began by sending a second package, this time containing the names of the officers who had executed the manipulated warrants and the forensic analysts who had filed false reports. He included a warning about the imminent plan to frame Voss herself. Days passed. Then, a minor news outlet ran a story about discrepancies in several drug convictions linked to Sentinel. The story did not mention Voss, but Felix recognized the case numbers, they were from his second package. Voss was using the information, carefully, methodically. She was building a legal foundation. Felix felt a spark of hope, but also a growing dread. Rask and his superiors would soon realize someone was leaking internal data. The surveillance systems Felix had built would be turned against him. He began scrubbing his own digital footprint, erasing logs that could connect his identity to the leaks. He knew he was running out of time. The walls of his apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage with invisible bars made of fiber optics and data packets. He barely slept. 1 week later, Commissioner Harlan Cross, the architect of Sentinel's expansion, called an emergency meeting at police headquarters. Felix, who was rarely seen at the department, received a summons. He attended, wearing a plain gray jacket, sitting in the back of a conference room lined with glass walls. Cross stood at the head of a long table, flanked by Victor Rask and several senior commanders. Cross spoke about an internal security breach, a leak of sensitive Sentinel data to unauthorized parties. He announced a full audit of all personnel with access to the system's core architecture. Felix's name was on the list. He kept his face neutral while his mind raced through every precaution he had taken. After the meeting, Rask approached him in the hallway. Rask was tall, with a politician's smile and cold eyes. He asked Felix if he had noticed anything unusual in the logs lately. Felix replied that everything appeared normal. Rask studied him for a moment, then nodded and walked away. Felix knew the conversation was a test. He also knew that Rask was not convinced. That evening, he returned home to find his apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing, but a single file on his desk had been moved. Someone had been inside. Felix did not call the police. Instead, he spent the night reinforcing his digital defenses, knowing that his physical safety was now equally at risk. Felix understood that his time was measured in days, perhaps hours. He accelerated his plans. He cloned the complete Sentinel database containing the manipulation records onto an encrypted external drive, which he hid inside a hollowed-out book on his shelf. He also prepared a dead man's switch, a script that would automatically release all incriminating evidence to 3 major news organizations if he failed to reset a timer every 12 hours. This was his insurance. Meanwhile, Judge Voss had filed a sealed motion with the regional court, requesting a special prosecutor to investigate Sentinel's integrity. Felix learned of this through his monitoring of court communications. The motion was a direct threat to Cross and Rask. 2 days after the motion was filed, Felix noticed that Sentinel's logs showed a new entry, a warrant request for Judge Voss's financial records, citing the fabricated bribery evidence. The arrest was now imminent. Felix had to force the issue into the open before the corrupt faction could execute their plan. He decided to use his dead man switch preemptively, but he needed to ensure the evidence was undeniable and that Voss would be protected. He worked through the night, verifying every file and adding redundant layers of encryption. Felix spent an entire night preparing a comprehensive package: the original code, the hidden subroutine, the log showing Rask's user account injecting the false scores, the list of framed individuals, and the forged evidence against Voss. He cross-referenced everything with timestamps and digital signatures. At dawn, he initiated the dead man's switch. Within hours, journalists from 3 international outlets received encrypted archives with decryption keys. Felix also sent an unencrypted summary to a trusted legal blogger known for exposing corruption. By midday, the first article appeared. It was cautious but detailed, naming Victor Rask as the operator of the manipulation. By evening, the story had been picked up by mainstream media. Felix watched the news unfold on his monitors. Commissioner Cross held a press conference denying all allegations, but his voice carried a tremor. Rask's office was conspicuously empty. The city's prosecutor announced an emergency investigation. Felix felt no triumph, only a weary sense that he had set in motion forces beyond his control. He closed his laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the distant sound of sirens. The following morning, police investigators arrived at Felix's apartment. They were not there to arrest him, they came with questions about Sentinel's architecture. The investigators belonged to a special unit that had been assembled by the prosecutor's office, independent of Cross's command. Felix agreed to cooperate. He led them through the evidence, explaining the technical details with the patience of a teacher. He showed them the hidden subroutine, the override logs, and the chain of command that led to Rask. The investigators took notes, their faces grim. Meanwhile, Victor Rask attempted to flee the country but was detained at the airport. In his luggage, agents found a laptop containing the same manipulation tools. Commissioner Cross resigned hours later, though he denied any personal knowledge. Judge Voss, now publicly vindicated, issued a statement calling for a full judicial inquiry. Felix's role remained anonymous for the first few days, but a journalist eventually traced the leak back to him through metadata he had overlooked in his exhaustion. His photograph appeared on the evening news. He became the subject of intense public debate. Some called him a hero, others a traitor. Felix's life changed overnight. His apartment became a gathering point for reporters. His phone rang continuously. He stopped answering. The police offered him protective custody, but he declined, choosing instead to stay in a small hotel on the outskirts of the city under a false name. The investigation widened. Dozens of convictions were overturned, and 8 officers were suspended pending further inquiry. The city's government announced the immediate suspension of Sentinel's predictive modules. Felix watched these developments from a distance, feeling a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. He had built a system meant to protect, and it had been used to harm. Now that system was being dismantled. He received a message through a secure channel he had set up weeks earlier. It was from Judge Voss. She wanted to meet him. Felix hesitated for 2 days before agreeing. They met in a quiet cafe near the courthouse. Voss was older than her photographs, with tired eyes and a firm handshake. She thanked him for his courage and asked if he understood the personal cost he would continue to pay. The meeting with Judge Voss lasted 3 hours. She asked Felix about his motivations, his fears, and his understanding of what had gone wrong. He spoke honestly about his isolation, his belief that technology could rise above human fallibility, and his eventual realization that any tool could be corrupted if placed in the wrong hands. Voss listened without interrupting. At the end, she told him that the judicial inquiry would likely call him as a witness. She warned that his involvement would become permanent public record, and that some people would never forgive him. Felix said he understood. He also knew that other people, the ones whose convictions were overturned, the families shattered by false arrests, might see him differently. Some might blame him for creating the weapon, while others might thank him for disarming it. He returned to his hotel room that night and slept for the first time in weeks without the glow of monitors illuminating his face. He dreamed of code, but for once it was not tangled, it was clean, simple, and silent. The judicial inquiry began in the autumn. Felix testified over 3 days, explaining Sentinel's architecture, the insertion of the rogue code, and his discovery of the manipulation. Victor Rask, who had been offered a plea deal, testified against his superiors, naming Commissioner Cross as the instigator of the scheme. Cross, in turn, denied everything but was implicated by financial records showing irregular payments to political allies who had pushed for Sentinel's expansion. The hearings were broadcast live, and Felix became an unlikely public figure, the reclusive programmer who had brought down a corrupt network. He found the attention uncomfortable, but he endured it because he believed the truth mattered. When the final report was issued, it recommended sweeping reforms to police oversight and a permanent ban on predictive surveillance without judicial warrants. Felix was not charged with any crime. The prosecutor concluded that he had acted to expose wrongdoing, not to commit it. He was, however, barred from future government contracts, a restriction he accepted without complaint. When the inquiry concluded, Felix returned to his apartment. The servers were gone, he had dismantled them months earlier. The monitors sat dark. He spent the first week cleaning, organizing, and rediscovering silence. He no longer worked with surveillance systems. Instead, he took a job teaching basic programming at a community center, helping young adults understand both code and its ethical implications. He still followed the news occasionally, the overturned convictions, the civil lawsuits filed by the innocent people who had been framed, the slow process of reform. Judge Voss continued her work, now with a national reputation for integrity. Felix sometimes received emails from former colleagues asking for advice. He answered when he could. He had not sought redemption, nor did he believe he had fully achieved it. But he had learned that building a system was not the same as controlling it, and that responsibility did not end when the code was written. He lived quietly, no longer hiding, and for the first time in years, he began to look outward rather than inward. The city continued to change around him, and he let it. On some evenings, He would walk through the streets without looking at a single screen, finding peace in the simple fact that he was no longer alone with his machines.